This man has been starving for my attention for a very long time, and usually I ignore him, but I'm going to go ahead and give him some of my attention right now. These statements that he makes, these memes that he makes, are in response to a video where I was talking about slavery and how the Bible condones slavery in Leviticus 25. And just like most black people who want to try to figure out a way that they can still worship this book, but and then validate the slavery and try to make it seem like it was some type of servitude, as if this guy was against slavery. They try to go to these different writings. This guy uses like 50 little memes and never really expresses anything and swears up and down that I worship comedic science, but he has absolutely no idea whatsoever, but it's okay. So he does this, and I'm going to pop a few of them up right now. So the first two that he has up here is he's talking about Exodus 21:16. Exodus 21:16 does say that anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. Now, what he fails to tell you is that he doesn't give it within the chapter that is talking about. These are laws of Israelites against Israelites, whereas Leviticus 25 is talking about, expressly says, for those of you who are foreigners amongst you, amongst the Israelites, and of the foreign nations, you may purchase your slaves from them. Meaning you can own slaves of other people, but Leviticus 25 expressly says you cannot own slaves of your own people, even though there is a caveat to which they can own their own people as slaves. And I'll go ahead and tell you what it is. If someone is in indentured servitude to you and then you give them a wife, the master gives them a wife and they have children, then the wife and the children must remain as slaves to them. If the man decides that he wants to continue to live with his wife and child, then he goes to the temple, stands up against the post and allows his ears to be pierced, and then declares himself a slave for life. So there is a way that Israelites can own Israelites for in perpetuity. But this is a misrepresentation when you try to say this is a statement of God being against slavery. Now, does that mean that this deity would have been against the kidnapping that happened in Africa once they stopped purchasing slaves from the natives? Yes, he would have been against that if they were all Hebrew Israelites, but they weren't Israelites, if they were of the same clan. And since they weren't of the same clan, then it doesn't count. And that's what this is actually saying in Exodus 21:16, that these are laws that are based on the same clan. There's a bunch of different laws that they put in there of them based on the same clan. And the next one in Deuteronomy goes all the way there and explains it, so I don't even have to look it up, where it says if someone is caught kidnapping a fellow Israelite, and it says this rule is basically for other fellow Israelites. Stop trying to use this and say that your God does not condone slavery. It condones slavery of people that are in a different clan, tribe, group, race than you are in. So in this first one that he has on this one, he's quoting 1 Timothy 1:10. And in 1:10 it says, for sexually immoral, those practicing homosexuality, for slave traders, liars, and perjurers. But what he's not giving you is what it says before that. What he says before that is he's urging in Macedonia, he's urging Timothy not to give in to false doctrine, to false teachings, and to beware of these false teachers. Then he talks about how we know that the law is good if one uses it properly. So the law is good if it's used properly. So when it comes to slavery, if they're foreigners and you take them as slaves and pass them inheritance, that's good usage of the law, because that is the law. But if they're your fellow Israelites, then in the 7th year you let them go free, and that will be good usage of the law. So we know that the law is good for one who uses it properly. That's the proper use of the law. We also know that the law is made not for the righteous, but for lawbreakers and rebels, the ungodly and sinful, the unholy and irreligious, for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers. So he's saying that we also know the law is not made for the righteous, because the righteous person is going to use the law properly. So they don't need the actual law in order to apply the law properly, because they're going to do it properly anyway. It is the unrighteous, the irreligious, the slave trader that doesn't apply the law properly, the slave trader that does kidnap his own people and make them into slaves, the slave trader that does go that beats his slave to death and they die within 1 or 2 days. It is for the slave trader who's not obeying the law of slavery that is in your book that is talking about. So that's a big failure, sir, on that one right there. And then he goes back to his Exodus 21, which we've already discussed. But then he puts down there how ancient Egyptians used to have pictures of bestiality on their walls and things of that nature. I don't care. Most cultures had some type of sexual immorality, graffiti on their walls, whether it was the Kemetic people, it was the Greeks, the Israelites, everybody at some point has some level of that. And so what? You keep thinking that I worship Ra or something. What's wrong with you, dude? You pay a little bit too much attention to me in that way. I have to question you. And here we go with his last one, where this is supposed to be his idea that this God does not approve of slavery, because he says that in Deuteronomy 15 it says, "Do not return a slave to their master if he takes refuge with you." Notice he cuts it off and excludes the part that says in 16, where it says, "Let them live among you wherever they like and in whatever town they choose. Do not oppress them." What this is talking about is not Israelite slave, not someone who has been taken into slavery from Israelites, but someone who was enslaved in by some other tribe, some other group, and then they escaped to the Israelites, and it's saying don't send them back. Much like the Underground Railroad worked in the Americas and how Canada worked, where they did not send back slaves most of the time, even though they did allow the secret police, the slave catchers, the one that we now call police, to come up there and track runaway slaves and take them back. It does say, so it does allow for them to have those slaves in their community, but just don't send them back to their masters. This is not talking about not having slavery in itself. That doesn't make any sense. You're not putting this in a way that makes it relevant to the conversation to which I was had. And in no way does any of these take away the fact that Leviticus 25 says very clearly that of the foreigners who live amongst you, and of foreigners you can buy slaves and pass them down to your children. There's no way around that. But since you brought Deuteronomy, this portion of Deuteronomy, I want you to, skip to Malou, right on up a little bit on that one, and go to Deuteronomy, the same chapter, 23, verse 7 and 8. Do not despise the Edomites, for Edomites are related to you. Do not despise an Egyptian, because you resided as foreigners in their country. The third generation of children born to them may enter the assembly of the Lord. Sir, it seems like you're kind of outside of what it says, since you always trying to tell me that I'm worshiping Kemet, that I'm a Kemite, or whatever you want to call it. But it's all right, man. Look, it doesn't matter what you think I am. The only thing that matters is that I know who I am. So one day you may know yourself. Then I hope so. So, yeah. Always remember, you got to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.